Well, good afternoon, good morning, good evening. My name is Alex Niehaus. I'm the VP of Marketing at Active Endpoints. And I want to welcome you to the second of our new webinar series entitled CTO Tuesdays. This week our topic is WS-HumanTask, the new standard for work list management. It's a very exciting topic, and I want to get right into it. First, I'd like to show you a little bit about our webinar. For those of you who joined us in the past, this is a little bit of review. We're using GoToWebinar today. There's a little control panel that came up when you started the webinar, and you can use the double right arrow to minimize that control panel. You can also click the maximize button to get the best resolution possible for the meeting on your display. At the end of Dr. Michael Rowley's content today and talk about WS-HumanTask, we'll be taking questions. We always like to end with a panel. And today we have two ways for you to ask us questions. Everyone is on mute, and we're going to keep the audio muted so that everyone is able to hear us. But you can either ask questions in the chat window, or today we've added the ability for you to enter questions on Twitter if you use the hashtag CTOT for CTO Tuesdays. So if you have a question and you have a Twitter account, you can certainly log in and enter a question with that hashtag, and I'll be monitoring both, and we'll take those questions along with any others that we have in the chat and answer them during the panel at the end. So what is CTO Tuesdays? Very quickly, it's a recurring webinar series that we have every Tuesday at this time. We pick a single topic of interest to developers, enterprise architects, managers, and people that are interested broadly in the business process management discipline. You can register. We've made it more convenient to register for CTO Tuesdays. There's a link off of ActiveVOS.com. So it's ActiveVOS.com/CTOT, which will always take you to the next GoToMeeting site where you can register for the following Tuesday's webinar. And it's now possible to download episode number 1, which was very interesting, on the BPMN Diamond on our blog at vossabilities.com. We have a category called CTO Tuesdays. That was a user suggestion from last week that we thought was a great idea, so we've implemented it. And you can also subscribe, we'll talk a little bit more about that, to a feed during the Q&A and the wrap-up if you want to get these delivered, if you want to get the webinar replays delivered on your iPod or other portable media device. So a little bit about why we've decided to do this. We believe that there's an enormous amount of educational material available, but some of it can be a little dry, and we wanted to share our excitement about business process management with you. And so we thought that having our technical leader and our CTO articulate and explain some of the technologies that are in use to revolutionize the way process applications are developed and deployed would be interesting, and so far our experience is that it is very interesting to people. We have a great response this week, and we had a wonderful response last week, and we just hope to keep it fresh and interesting for you every week. This is non-commercial. We're talking about technologies, not products, but you'll forgive us if we use ActiveVOS when we do a demo as the method by which we demonstrate the technology that we're talking about. So with that, I'd like to turn it over to Dr. Michael Rowley, the Chief Technology Officer of Active Endpoints, to talk about WS-HumanTask, the new standard for work list management.
Thank you. So the WS-HumanTask is the name of this talk. It is a standard that is being worked on by a technical committee in OASIS. The name of the technical committee is People for People, because the actual committee is in charge of two standards. The WS-HumanTask standard, which standardizes a work list system, and the use of WS-HumanTask within Beeple, and that is Beeple for People. Now, if you look at the two specs, you'll find that the vast majority of the work is actually in the standardization of the work lists, the WS-HumanTask standard, and a much smaller spec is used in People for People. Some of the characteristics of this is, for People for People, is the ability to deal with what is called ad hoc attachments. In People, you tend to have to be very specific about passing data around from activity to activity. And People for People kind of adds this set of documents that are available throughout a process without having to do explicit passing of the documents around. And then it depends on the WS-HumanTask. WS-HumanTask is a standard. It standardizes the basic concept of a work list system for people doing their work. And it has a tie-in to WS coordination for lifecycle events. I'll get into that later. You don't have to worry about it right now if you don't understand that. And defines generic roles and logical people groups. Let me try to make this concrete a little bit. I'm going to flip around between a runtime and our designer and some of these slides. By the way, this talk will mostly be at more of an architectural level of what this is and what's going on, not so much of the how-to. In a future CTO Tuesdays, we will get more into a step-by-step approach to achieving things. I wanted to get more of an architectural view of this. But first, to make it concrete, let me just show what I'm talking about when I say we're standardizing task management, work lists. So I just logged in as a user into a web-based UI for looking at the tasks that I've been given. So some office has organized their employees by giving them tasks and putting them on a work list. This is a web-based client. All of this is highly customized, or even more than customizable. It's things that you can actually create your own UI for. In our version, you also have this button here to subscribe to an RSS feed. So you could actually use Outlook or any other mail client, most other mail clients that can also be RSS clients, to see the list of things that I have to do. And for each task, I can, when it originally is created, it's given to an entire group of people. And so I'm seeing the tasks that have been given to my group. If I think I want to work on it, I'll hit claim. When I've claimed it, it will no longer be in the list of unclaimed tasks for other people. So it basically will go away from the other people in the group. And then I can start working on it. When I'm working on a task, what I see is data that the designer of the application wanted me to see but not change, and then data that I'm supposed to fill in some way. Some of this might be optional and some of it might be required. And I also can see some things around the borders of this. At the bottom, I can see that I can add comments to the task. Comments are useful because they are get passed along from task to task, so that people can write a little something, a little statement that they would just like to travel with the task. There's also attachments, so I can have Word documents, Excel spreadsheets, and arbitrary documents that I associate with this work. That again is going to be given, will travel with the task and be given back to the business process that kicked this thing off. And I've got a history of what's happened in the task. At the top, I've got a list of things I can do with it. If I don't want to work on the thing and I don't want it to be in my face for a while, I can suspend it. If I want to give it to somebody else, I can assign it. All of these things, by the way, is our interface to operations that are in the WS-HumanTask standard. So one of the buttons is release. What that is the opposite of what I did before, which was to claim it. So these are various things that you can do. A lot of work list systems have similar concepts to this, but one of the differences in WS-HumanTask versus the way work lists have happened in the past is the approach to it. So I have to give credit to the spec, and actually some of these diagrams, I'll even be more specific, were contributed by a guy named Frank Lehman. So if you ever go to the WSHT spec, you'll see some of these same diagrams. The way workflow management systems, and a workflow system is basically a subset of a BPMS. We normally talk about business process management, but that includes workflow and business monitoring and a bunch of other things. But a piece of it is workflow. So typically anything that does workflow will include work done by people. And the work done by people is usually tightly coupled with the workflow system. And there's no teasing it apart. There's no using tasks separate from workflow or workflow separate from tasks. What is interesting about the way the WS-HumanTask standard is designed is it's really designed to separate these two concerns. The workflow system is in charge of moving from activity to activity, but then it talks at a distance to a task processor, which is the thing that is responsible for getting the task done. And so let me go into some more detail. The task processor uses a service approach to providing tasks. That means that when somebody wants you to do something, he wants you to, I had just shown in my example, somebody was doing an estimate for work on a car in that case. That is work, that is a service that looks like any other web service. And now I'm going to flip to our designer and try to make this concrete. That task that I was working on is a task that was this third step, the first human step of this estimation process. And this step is done using a task, and that task has inputs and outputs and a general task definition. And the task definition has an interface. Now, the interface is an interface like you'd get with an automated service, as in it uses WSDL. So if I click on this, I'll actually go into a web service definition language, WSDL definition of the task. All that really means is that it's a standardized definition of the input and output of the task. I showed you before there's data that you want to present to the user and data that you want back from the user. The data you're presenting to the user is the input, and the data you want back from the user is the output. Because what's a little bit weird, and it sometimes takes people a little bit of time to get their head around this, is to think of a person as a service, as providing a service, and that the input is what you're showing the person, and the output is what they are filling in. It's more typical that when somebody's filling in a form, you think of that as input to an application, which is the other side. It's actually output of the service being provided by that person. So, and just in case you're getting scared at all that this is sounding complex, this is architecturally what happens under the covers, you don't necessarily have to work with WSDL when you're using a system like ActiveVOS. When you're using a system like ours, you can create tasks, and if you should happen to have an interface laying around, you can use it. But you can also just specify your inputs and outputs using either XML schema as what it should look like, or sample data. You can show sample data for input and sample data for output, and you don't have to worry too much about thinking about WSDL and port types and that sort of thing. But under the covers, it's really important that it actually does create this WSDL port type. So since every task has different inputs and different outputs, every time somebody creates a new task, a definition of that has to be deployed to the task processor. So we can see there's this task processor that gets new task definitions over time as new kinds of things need to be done. Okay. The next concept that WS-HumanTask has after the task processor is the task parent. Now, normally, when you've got something tightly coupled with workflow system and the task management, the task parent would be a workflow system or a business process management system. But because WS-HumanTask doesn't have to be used, the work list doesn't have to be used by a workflow system, we have to come up with a more generic term for whoever wants work done by a person. And that's called the task parent. So the task parent asks for somebody to do something, which is like, going back to our example again, it's, create an estimate for work done on this car. And the task parent calls this a specific operation. And let me flip back to our example. The task parent is getting a specific operation, which is the initial estimate. This is or if I went to the task definition, I'm going to flip around a little bit and went to its interface, you can see that this operation is this invoke estimation operation. So this is the operation which, if you were calling it just from Java or something else, this is the method you would call. We also have in the WS-HumanTask standard a way of tying the task parent's life cycle, how long it lives and when it dies and all the rest, to the guy doing the work. And the point of this, and the easiest use case to think of, is that when a business process or workflow terminates, it stops for some reason, somebody's killed it off, it doesn't make sense for a task that's sitting in somebody's inbox to still be worked on. That'd be wasted work. So you need this way of keeping track between the guy who asked for the task and the task itself if the requester ever goes away. That is a classic example of a coordination protocol, which is a more general term for something like a transaction protocol. These things, their lifetimes are tied to one another. So because it's a coordination protocol, we use WS coordination. And then if the workflow dies, or if the workflow, for some reason, even if it doesn't die, even if it goes to a different part of the process and no longer needs this activity done, it can kill the activity. It can pull the task off of the work list. So now, what does this task processor do in order to do its work? Well, the task processor is in charge of maintaining all of the tasks for all of the users And then ultimately, a user is going to pull one off a list and want to look at it. The software that actually does that is the task client. This is the thing, flipping back to my UI, this is the task client. Actually, when I actually go in and look at a specific task, this is the task client, which is allowing me to work on an individual task. And the task client talks to the task processor through an interface, a task client interface. This is the API, it's a web service API between two different pieces of the task management system, the client of it and the processor. And the task client then has some way of presenting a user interface to the user, who, and it may include the use of a business application. Like it might say, go fill in this Excel spreadsheet and fill in the details of the Excel spreadsheet. So that would be making use, the business application here would be Excel that it's using as part of the UI. It's handing you a document you've got to use another application for. Now, one of the things about this task client is it's typical if you've got a web-based environment, for the way this to be done is to have the task client be another piece of software running on an app server, one piece of software running on an app server. And that would call the appropriate standardized WS-HumanTask operations to talk to the task processor. And then it serves it up to the user just using straight HTML pages and getting the results using an HTTP post. So there's this intermediary, this guy in the middle that is taking stuff from the user as web pages, turning it into web service WS-HumanTask calls to talk to the task processor. In the 7.0 line, we are actually moving toward a new approach to that, which is to take advantage of the fact that web clients are getting much more capable. And they can actually, through AJAX, be the task client. And it can be the task client either using WSHT and a SOAP binding, sending SOAP over the wire, or we're also coming out with the ability, just for the sake of simplicity, to use a JSON binding, because when you're working in an AJAX world, it's more convenient to use JSON, which stands for JavaScript Object Notation. It just makes the programming a little bit easier. But in either case, you are getting rid of this guy in the middle that is just as doing a transformation. It's just kind of getting in the way. So let's also look at more of what's being standardized in the standard. So that's some of the architectural pieces of what's talking to what the major software components. But other things that are standardized include the various operations that you can do on a task. So when I'm a potential owner of a task, I can claim the task, and I can then complete it, release it, assign it, etc. Let me show you the full state diagram. You don't generally need to understand this, but it's useful that the standard itself gets to this level. It gets to the detail of showing, of making it so that all of the work list systems go through the same states for a task. It's first created, and then somebody claims it, and it goes from ready to reserved, and then they start working on it. It's in process. They can then release it, and it goes back to the ready state. They can give it to somebody else. All of these states are things that all of the implementations of WS-HumanTask will use. Another thing that's being standardized in WS-HumanTask are the various roles that you get when you're working on a process. Let me show you that a little bit more. I'm going to look at this, do this initial estimate task. I can see when I go to the definition of the task that there are assignments. You can get potential owners is who can actually do this work. Business administrator is somebody who can go in at any point and take it from somebody who owns it, give it to somebody else, kick the person who's not doing it and get them to speed up, basically keep track of what's going on. Excluded owners is useful for when you've got a large group that is potential owners, but you want some subset of them to be people who aren't allowed. Task initiator can be set for who kicked it off, and the task stakeholders are other people who care about this task. Now, the reason why you're standardizing on all these roles is because each of the roles have different things they can do. And I just pasted a subset of the spec. These are some of the operations that are standardized in WS-HT. And these are the various roles. Oops, back up. These are the various roles and what can be done, can and can't be done by each role. Now, here again, the end user will see that not by doing something like reading a state machine or reading a list, a big chart. The user will see that just by virtue of what buttons show up at the top of the screen. But what's valuable is that if you go from between any two WS-HumanTask-based systems, they'll all show basically the same thing. So that is the basic architecture, some of the basic things standardized by WS-HumanTask. In a future talk, I'll talk more about the way ActiveVOS, for example, makes it possible to create these tasks, use them within a process. A little bit more of this how-to, but that's kind of an architectural overview.
Well, thank you very much, Michael. I found that fascinating. I'm going to take control back of the display, and I want to apologize to everyone that I didn't advance the slides when I started. You didn't miss much. All of the information that I would have presented is on the slide that you see now. I'll just run through that very quickly before we start with our Q&A. So if you'd like to try ActiveVOS, please download it at ActiveVOS.com. You can always register for an upcoming CTO Tuesdays at ActiveVOS.com/CTOT. And replays are available on our blog at VOSabilities.com. If you have a portable media player, you can easily subscribe to the podcast feed, which includes CTO Tuesdays and other webinars and information in iTunes by searching for Possibilities. Our contact info is here, and we hope that you will contact us and let us know what you thought of this topic. We're also interested in hearing suggestions for additional topics, and we're also very excited to hear any of your ideas about how we can improve what we're attempting to do here each week. So now I've got a series of questions. I want to encourage everyone to ask additional questions in the chat or the question area of the GoToMeeting. I have got tweet deck running, so if anyone is on Twitter and wants to use the hashtag CTOT, by all means, we'll get to your questions that way. I want to start sort of with a general question to you, Michael, because I think there's quite a fundamental thing going on here that you achieve when you do separate the tasks from the processing, which seems to be the ultimate aim of this particular standard. I wonder if you could talk a little qualitatively about the task states and the owners. Did the standards committee work hard to try and make this as broad as possible so that any workflow could be automated? I mean, I would imagine that some resistance to this could be in the form of, well, it can't do this particular unique state, or it can't do that particular kind of task.
Yeah,
so how does the standard address that problem?
It is a very general set of states. And one of the things that I don't want to give a misinterpretation of, which is when we show these various roles, these generic roles like potential owners and excluded owners, etc., there's also a layer of indirection where they equate to a concept of a logical people group, which I'll have to get into in a future talk, and I certainly will. It's logical, meaning that even when you say that an administrator is going to do something as far as WS-HT is concerned, you're going to have another layer where you can define what you mean by administrator. An administrator could be a fairly complex concept of depending on what you're working on and who's doing it and what time of day it is. I mean, it's potentially very complex. So there's a variety. That's just one example of places where we've standardized stuff, but we've also, in all of these places, allowed for flexibility on how it maps to a specific environment so that it can map to as many environments as we can.
Yeah, and if I may, I think that the brilliance of this is that finally, by separating tasks from the processing, you have made it possible for very broad adoption of workflow. Because the other side of the coin is that people have had to do very, very hard things in order to automate workflows, and then they end up worried about what the impact of that is in the future, having to migrate and maintain that. We've got some great questions and more coming in. I wanted to start with this one. An attendee asks, can WS-HT support mobile applications? I thought this was a good one because, in fact, it gets at that protocol that you were talking about, the new protocol between a client and a server.
Yeah, and one of the things, the short answer is yes. And if I might have control back.
Yes, of course.
One nice thing about WS-HT is that it allows for multiple renderings of a task. There's this thing called rendering hints, and depending on the situation, you can add more and more custom renderings. So you could have an iPhone-specific rendering, or other mobile, or a variety of, maybe a tablet device. There's a variety of things, and you don't have to choose for one task one way of doing it. You can actually have the same task have multiple renderings, and then when the client logs in and asks for their task, the device actually sends the client, what we call task client, sends a list of preferred renderings, basically in order, saying, give me the iPhone one if you've got one, and if you don't have one, give me the web one, and if you don't have one, then I can't handle it. And then it'll give the appropriate rendering for that device.
Very clever. Very clever. So let me move on to another question. This attendee asks, I'm curious about the use of a WSDL for a human task. This person really is getting the core point here, which is the human task is a service. I'm curious about the use of a WSDL for a human task, as this would need to be asynchronous, and therefore you would not be able to get the response back.
Right. There's a couple answers to that. One of them is that you use a binding that allows for an asynchronous callback, because there's nothing actually in WSDL that requires that you have a TCP socket open between the request and the response. The response is basically done through an asynchronous callback days later, but it's modeled as a single port type with an input and an output.
Fabulous. Let me encourage people to continue entering questions. We're getting still more, and Michael and I will stay here and answer them all. Here's that attendee just said thank you for your answer, by the way.
Okay.
Let me see. Here's an interesting question about workflow in time-critical environments. Can you provide an example of taskless management in a time-critical environment like a customer contact management center? This attendee wants to know if the approach of WS-HumanTask can be considered where every millisecond counts.
Let's see. Well, presumably if it's a person doing it, it wouldn't be milliseconds, but it might be seconds, right?
Yeah, it might be seconds.
What we've got in WS-HumanTask, and there is a lot to it, and I will probably create WS-HumanTask Part 2, since there's so many things I didn't get to. And that is that you have, with tasks, you have the ability to do escalations. Are you
attempting to show something?
I am. I'm sorry.
I took it back. I'm greedy. I want control of the screen, so there you go, my man.
Okay. There are these things called deadlines. So you can add a deadline, and you can have the deadline be based on, there's a bunch of states that task might need to go through. You can have it a deadline for when it starts, a deadline for when it completes, or you can have these alarms. And you can also see what a variety of things that you can do in response to one of these deadlines going off. Somebody didn't do it in time. You can notify somebody through the WS-HumanTask notification service or send an email, or you can do some more complex things. You can reassign it, or you can do arbitrary work by kicking off a process. Once you kick off a process, and this is a process that's kicked off in response to something isn't happening that should be happening, and then a whole process can go on into whatever a process can do to solve the problem. Is that
very flexible?
Is that just, I'm hoping that that is the level he's looking for here.
Yeah, I think that might be. If we didn't answer that completely, I'd ask the attendee to please ask a follow-up question. The questions are, we're still getting additional questions, and I notice most people are still in attendance, so we'll continue as long as there are questions, and please feel free to enter an additional question or a follow-up. Let me dispose of this question quickly. This attendee asks where the presentation will be. The presentation is going to be contained in the webinar replay, which we will post to our blog by probably tomorrow afternoon, Wednesday afternoon. It takes a little while to transcode it for iPod format, and I usually post two versions, a MP4, which is a standard codec, and the iPhone iTunes compatible version, which requires QuickTime. So look for it on our blog tomorrow afternoon. If you have a podcatcher or a news reader, you could subscribe to the feed from our blog, and you'll be automatically notified when the content is available. Here's an interesting question. An attendee asks, how often are the WS specifications updated?
Oh, that
I think it means WS-HT here, but
well, actually, it could be more general. The process by which the WS standards are updated is through these technical committees. Web service standards tend to be done either by OASIS or by the W3C. What both of these standards organizations try to do is play the right balance, strike the right balance of making sure that each version is done enough that you can not modify it for quite a while, for quite a number of years, and then maybe someday later come back with a subsequent version. Part of that is the process itself and all of the committee work. Things just don't happen very quickly. That has the advantage that things aren't changing all the time underneath you, but they do eventually change so that the standards can keep up with the changing needs or any problems that have been discovered. By the way, some of the web service standards have gotten a bad rap because of work that has happened outside of the standards committee before they were even standardized. Like, even WSDL 1.1 was not produced by a standards organization. And a number of early drafts of WS addressing and a bunch of the other ones, just a group of companies got together and said, we declare this to be WS addressing, and then eventually they give it to a standards organization. And so those
Not the same thing that's going on here, right?
Right. Those iterations go kind of quickly, and sometimes people get kind of frustrated that, wait a second, there are too many versions of these things. But even when those happen, once they're given to a standards organization, then things become much more manageable.
Slow down.
They have well thought through versions that come out at reasonable intervals.
If I may, I think that what you showed today demonstrates clearly that in the area of standardizing workflow, that this has been very carefully thought out in order to be broadly applicable and adoptable by everybody. We have got some great questions. Let me ask you this one. This attendee asks, how does the WS-HT standard handle the workflow equivalent of the database lock? In other words, if two people are simultaneously working on a task, can the input of both people be negotiated in the standard, or is it person one responded first, therefore person two is to be ignored?
That's a great question. And I'm going to have to go into more detail on our version 2 of this talk, or not version 2, but the short answer is that in the draft of the WS-HT standard that's coming out at the end of the year will be a concept of composite tasks. In the draft standard that exists now, only one person can be working on a task at a time. That's a constraint. But at the end of the year, we're going to have a new feature, essentially, where multiple people can work on a task. You can decide whether they have to happen in sequence or in parallel. If they happen in parallel, you then get to decide how to combine their answers, and then you can actually choose. First one wins, last one wins, or they're combined. For things that are numbers, you can sum them or take the minimum or the maximum. There's a wide variety of ways of handling it. So the answer is all of them.
Very interesting. I am, because we bill this as lasting a half hour, and we're now at 12:45 Eastern Time, I'm going to make this last call for questions. We have a couple more that I want to run through, some really good ones. Here, I think, is one that will give you the opportunity, Michael, to reiterate the importance of the standard and its objectives. This attendee asks, can WS-HT compete with legacy workflow apps from the 90s that contain multiple work items, queues, etc.? And how would you compare the WS-HT from legacy workflow environments?
I think the best way to answer that is to talk about the people that are on this committee. The people who are on this committee are people who did these 90s-based workflow systems. and everybody in there. And by the way, I should say that, the people on the committee are the engineers and standards people who really know this stuff from the companies, from IBM, from Oracle, from TIBCO, from Microsoft, from SAP, and they are all very much invested in getting something that can do what their previous systems have done, because no company wants to sign up for a standard that is going to take them backward.
Yeah, well, as I thought you were going to say that they're all very much invested in getting a standard that can do what they were frustrated they couldn't do in their 90s.
Or even
right, in addition
beyond.
To, yeah. Right, yeah, what we could do plus.
Yes.
Yeah. Let's see. So I have a comment. I just want to get this comment in quickly. An attendee says he's looked at the blog and he wants to download just the slides. I think we can post a PDF of the slides. Thank you for that feedback, sir or ma'am. And so we'll work on that. This is the kind of feedback we really appreciate. Tell us what you like and don't like about what we're doing, because we want this to be valuable for you. So I appreciate that feedback very much. Here's a question that I thought would be kind of a good wrap-up question. This person asks, how does one get started with BPM specifically if you're a database architect or a solutions architect? This is someone who's looking, I think, at workflow and standardization of workflow and what business process management offers, and wants to understand how to begin to develop an infrastructure based on standards to enable those kinds of capabilities.
Well, the best way, in my opinion, is to do a trial. So ActiveVOS, what I've been showing on the screen, is available for a 30-day trial. All of these concepts, the WS-HT and the B for P, people for people, sometimes we shorten it to B for P. These standards are implemented with great fidelity, and so you can play with it. We will if you request a key, an evaluation key, and you say, I'm just learning, you'll get one, and you can just find out about these technologies and see if you can understand how things fit in, how you can get started on a project, and get a feeling for it.
I think there are two very important points that you made there. One is that standards aren't products. You have to implement the standard, which is obvious. And the second is that any implementation can have more or less fidelity to the standard. And so this is not to be commercial, but we pride ourselves, with you leading the development effort, we pride ourselves on having great fidelity, or as I put it, rigorous adherence to the standards. So, well, with that, I want to thank everyone who attended today. Thank you so much for your time. We really appreciate it. We would love your feedback and your input on additional suggestions. Check our blog. We will find a way to post just the PDF of the PowerPoint. It'll probably be a third attachment in the RSS feed. And remember to register at www.activevos.com/CTOT for CTO Tuesdays for next week's topic. And